In Afghanistan, my experience has been that the most effective organisations tend to be organisations like Oxfam, who are well established, who have really good links into communities, very strong Afghan staff, have 20 or 30 years experience on the ground working up and down through the region. One of the problems recently has been there's been an enormous amount of waste and there's been an enormous amount of corruption. And although maybe it's too simple to say it, from my point of view, working with people like Oxfam is a very, very good way of ensuring that aid money is well spent. People talk about political decision-making in Afghanistan and compare it to the decision-making in Westminster. I think the big difference is this, that very sadly what's happened in countries like Afghanistan is that their own governments are being marginalised. Too many foreigners are coming in, generals, soldiers, diplomats from other countries with huge amounts of money. And this means that the Afghan government doesn't really take responsibility for its actions. It's too easy for President Karzai to stand back and say, not my decision, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, I don't know what the Americans are supposed to be doing. The result is not good. There are many, many problems in Westminster, but at least in Westminster, you know who's supposed to be taking the decisions. I'm not actually that confident that the Afghan government is ready to take over responsibility, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't leave. I think the time has come now, after 10 years of military operations, to realise that we need to move to a new phase. And that phase needs to be basically humanitarian. It needs to be oriented towards development work. We need to look at Afghanistan much in the way that we'd look at other poor developing countries around the world, the way we look at Nepal, the way we look at Somalia. In other words, we need to move to a situation away from seeing it as, in inverted commas, the front line on the war on terror, towards realising that our objective should be to try to decrease the likelihood of a civil war, increase the likelihood of a political settlement, and continue to deliver development to what's the third poorest country in the world. Now, it's very difficult for the British government to have much influence over what happens in Afghanistan, what happens with the Afghan police or the Afghan army. We've been there nearly 10 years. If governments haven't achieved much in a country like Afghanistan in 10 years in terms of security, it's not likely that they probably will. But there is an enormous amount we can do in education, in health, in agriculture, in infrastructure, in trying to make sure Afghanistan is more stable, more prosperous, more humane in 30 years' time than it is today. Getting Afghans to support education for girls is possible. It's not something one wants to be pessimistic about. My experience in running a small primary school is that it took some time to get trust from the community. We ended up having to go to a lot of different families' houses to explain why we were bringing girls into education. And for the first 2 weeks of our school, we had the fathers sitting in the back row watching what was being taught to their daughters. But once they were reassured that the security was all right, that we weren't teaching things that they disapproved of, people became much more relaxed, and in fact we've ended up in a situation where half our students are girls. I think my own experience running a small charity in Afghanistan, I started with one employee in the back room of a tailoring shop and ended up with 650 employees, is that it's about working with the grain of Afghan society. When Afghans themselves really believe in a project, it moves so quickly. An example was our primary school, where it wasn't an idea that we had, it wasn't part of the strategy of the project, but as soon as Afghans wanted to push ahead and get on with it, within a few days we had this primary school open. So really my learning experience in this is really strong Afghan staff who understand their community and understand what's going to work is what makes things happen. And on the other hand, I think Oxfam's campaign on small farmers is so wise and so important. And the problems faced by small farmers all over the world are very similar. So much of the modern world is about these huge, large-scale farms which can ride you through the bad times when the price of sheep drops, when something goes wrong with government subsidies, when a drought happens. If you're a very, very large farm, you can often have the resources to get through it. But small farmers are the backbone of our societies, particularly in more traditional parts of the world. And they need every kind of support, not in terms of patronising handing out of cash. No farmer wants that. They want to be food producers. They're proud of producing lamb. They're proud of producing grains. But what they often need, I find in my experience, is support with inputs. Good investment, which would allow the irrigation to improve. Good investment to think about fencing or walling, or access to markets. One of the main things which Oxfam's worked on well around the developing world is thinking how to make sure that farmers, particularly in places like Kenya, understand prices, can get their flocks to the market and make sure they get a decent price. So it's working with the market rather than against it, but working in an intelligent, compassionate and sensitive fashion.